Okay, Your Excellency, the first question we start, let's start gradually, okay? Starting with the Qatar, the US Qatar partnership.
Sure.
Let's talk about the cybersecurity,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and the climate change, and
Yep.
then cooperation, okay? The climate change, I mean, while advancing, let's talk about advancing the Middle East peace efforts.
Okay.
Okay, so tell me about this cooperation between you and Qatar regarding the climate change, the cybersecurity, and its relationship to the peace efforts.
Sure. We'll start with cybersecurity. One of the things that you'll remember was hugely important during the World Cup was ensuring cybersecurity. There are malicious actors all over the world who will endeavor and attempt to infiltrate into all sorts of security and cyber systems, and not just, by the way, of a defense nature or of a overt security nature. It could be as routine as people's email, right, their phone calls, the data on their phones. Qatar has done a particularly good job, we think, of focusing on cybersecurity. During the World Cup, we worked together to make sure that all of the systems here were working and that people could trust that their data was safe. As Qatar's activity in ICT grows, there are American companies here doing incredible work, AWS, Google, Microsoft. There are more security-focused companies as well. What we think is that the future of AI, in particular, is going to force us to think about cybersecurity in a way that we haven't before. Beyond the risks that folks think are inherent in AI, and I think the world is sort of calming down or coming to grips with the fact that there may be more benefits to AI than there are risks, but we have to manage those risks. And as Qatar steps out and wants to be part of an artificial intelligence future, what we will have to do is use the good relationship that we've built over the course of the last few years to ensure that Qatar's economy can grow with regard to AI. That Qatar is using trusted vendors and trusted partners, including those from the United States. Tell me what you'd like to talk about.
I want to talk about the changes in the U.S. domestic, politics.
Yeah.
Okay, especially in the administration, the congressional, priorities. Yeah. Okay, and how does it impact the ongoing peace efforts in the Middle East?
And so, I was talking to someone just the other day, someone in government here, and we were talking about the fact, in Europe and with a parliamentary system, you aren't always worried that there's going to be a new administration and a change of policy. I think there's been, if you look at it broadly, great consistency in how the U.S. Engages here in the region. In truth, I don't know that we always had a right-sized view of the region. We've been accused of thinking of the region as one thing for a long time, as a monolith. But I think that we have come to know that we have to have bilateral relationships, full-fledged bilateral relationships with all of the countries of the region. I think that we have started to build those relationships. I think our relationship with Qatar, if you think about the security and defense relationship, you think about the economic and education relationship, has grown into a fully formed and maturing relationship, owing at least in part to Qatar's desire to be a force for good in the world. Because we have now these bilateral relationships, when a conflict arises in Gaza, as we have now, we are able to go to our partners and say, in order to solve this conflict, we need your specific ability and expertise in this way. Qatar's desire to be a mediator, Qatar's relationships around the region, their ability to work and talk with virtually anyone, has really aided our ability to help try to solidify a peace in this region. It is very hard work, and Qatar is willing to do that hard work. Qatar's interest in solving conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine crisis, war, and in Gaza provides us not just a partner, but in a lot of ways, Qatar's own foreign policy, their own interest in how they engage regionally, how they engage.
And Afghan.
And Afghanistan. I mean, in Afghanistan, what Qatar has done, what Qatar's quietly done, is they have used their standing and their relationships to say, here are priorities that we think can advance not just partners' relationships on Afghanistan, but they can help Afghanistan realize what it says it wants to do. Right, and so Qatar's interest in women and girls, Qatar's interest in ensuring agriculture grows, has really been a boom. Qatar's interest in having people here to have conversations about the future of Afghanistan is unique to Qatar, but also makes it possible for us to address some of the problems in the world. And by the way, Qatar seems tireless in this.
It is, yeah.
And so it sparks enthusiasm with their partners that I think has given us a new sort of energy about being able to solve these conflicts and having a good, reliable partner here in the region of Qatar.
Okay, let's talk more about the role of the educational and the cultural exchanges between the U.S. and the Middle Eastern countries in general. How does it impact the, I mean, let's talk again about these efforts.
Yeah, so we believe deeply, I believe deeply in people-to-people exchange. I signed a memorandum of understanding for an American's Corner here back in March of last year during our strategic dialogue, education, culture exchange. We're at the forefront.
Yeah, I read it. It was amazing.
We're at the forefront of what we're doing. It was maybe certainly one of the most productive parts of
Sure.
the exchange. We are committed to more Qatari students making it to the United States and going to school. There has been sort of a generational change. Many of the leaders in industry and commerce and education and government here in Qatar were educated, at least in part, in the United States. And we're proud of that fact.
Right. Okay, would you tell me more about the U.S. involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, especially the last 2 years after the 7th of October?
Yeah, and so we have, obviously, it has been a priority for us, and we were grateful that immediately Qatar was a partner in helping us try to find a path toward peace. Qatar has always, and I've said this frequently, been interested in the Palestinian cause. They have provided humanitarian assistance for years for Palestinians in Gaza, and so it was a natural fit for us to work with our Qatari partners and friends. I remember the Secretary of State came to Doha shortly after October 7th and met with His Highness the Emir and wanted to know the Qatari perspective. Where do we go from here? It was an incredibly fruitful conversation, and much of the work that we have been doing ever since then has relied on that understanding from Qatar of not only their experience with the Palestinian people, but their understanding of what it is they want and desire.
Tell me more about the future of the U.S. military, I mean engagement in the region, and how does this presence, contribute to or detract from long-term peace efforts?
Well, first, I think it's important to note that our military and security relationship with Qatar is exemplary. From our updating language in the Defense Cooperation Agreement to our ensuring Qatar has the right sort of equipment and material for its own defense, to working interoperably in the region to provide security. Qatar is an invaluable partner in this regard. Al-Udeid Air Base is the cornerstone, I think, of our regional security plans. Al-Udeid only grows in importance, only grows in capability, and we believe that Al-Udeid is the future here in the region. And so our engagement in the region, we should always say, is dependent, of course, on current factors. But our projecting secure future, our demonstrating our commitment to the region's security, to Qatar's security, starts at Al-Udeid.
Great, thank you so much. Your Excellency, the last question is the most critical and important question for us, okay? What are the key factors that guide the U.S. involvement or engagement, or an intervention in the conflict zones in the world, okay? And how does it balance humanitarian concerns with geopolitical interests?
Your first question is, how do we think about how we involve ourselves in conflict? I think it's important to remember that our values and our priorities are very much like Qatar's. Human suffering has always been a sort of urgent matter for us in our foreign policy. And so when you look at the things that we have done with Qatar around the world and around the region, it's suffering in Ukraine. It is the $5.9 billion that we have provided in Yemen. 5.1 billion of it is from USAID and is about humanitarian assistance.